essas atividades com transmissão ao vivo através do YouTube, então estamos organizando isso. Inclusive, agradeço a todos os participantes, não só do nosso programa de Bioquímica e Biologia Molecular PMBQBM, mas também do PDG, professores e alunos do ICS, que estão trabalhando no sentido de viabilizar essa palestra. A palestra vai ser realizada pelo professor Yousef, professor Tizabi, que é do Programa Multicêntrico de Bioquímica e Biologia Molecular, vai apresentar o professor, considerando que, na realidade, o professor Vitor, que é responsável pela vinda do professor Yousef para a nossa instituição, e hoje é um dia muito especial para o nosso programa. Especial porque, ao mesmo tempo que nós estamos trazendo o professor Yousef para esta conferência, nós podemos dizer que o nosso programa está de parabéns, porque, mais uma vez, através do programa Capstudie da UFBA, nós aprovamos 2 doutorados sanduíches. O resultado acabou de sair, de 2 alunas do PMBQBM, uma é a aluna Fernanda e a outra é a aluna Jéssica. Inclusive, a aluna Fernanda vai fazer o doutorado sanduíche por 6 meses no laboratório do professor Yousef. Além disso, é muito importante ressaltar a parceria que existe entre os diferentes programas, não só do ICS, mas da UFBA, no sentido de engrandecer as parcerias nacionais, e, neste caso, internacional, visando a melhoria da qualidade dos trabalhos que são desenvolvidos, dos resultados, e, principalmente, oportunizar para os nossos alunos, não só da pós-graduação, mas também da graduação, que aqui estão presentes, no sentido de aprender com novos professores, aprender o que está sendo feito, não só no Brasil, não só na Bahia, mas no mundo, dentro das áreas de pesquisa que nós desenvolvemos. Então, sejam muito bem-vindos. Agradeço de antemão a presença de todos e todas as parcerias e passo a palavra para o professor Vitor Diógenes, que vai apresentar o professor Yousef, e, ao final da palestra, eu vou passar também a palavra para a professora Silvia Lima Costa, que é do PPG, que também na realidade, a primeira professora responsável por esta parceria com o professor Yousef. Muito obrigada a todos e eu espero que aproveitem e muito esta conferência.
Bom dia a todos. Dando continuidade a essa sessão, né, eu venho informar que no dia 21 de outubro de 2022 foi assinado um termo de acordo de cooperação internacional acadêmico, científico e cultural entre as universidades, Universidade Federal da Bahia e a Harvard University. Este acordo, com validade de 5 anos, foi assinado pelos reitores de ambas as universidades, o professor Paulo César Miguel Oliveira, da UFBA, e Anthony Ruto, da Harvard. Este documento não somente consolida a cooperação existente entre os nomeados coordenadores institucionais da cooperação, o doutor Vitor da Silva e o doutor Yousef Tizabi, como passa a nortear e servir como agente facilitador para o planejamento e execução de cooperações e mobilidade entre pesquisadores e estudantes das diferentes áreas do saber. Cabe aqui ressaltar a importância do apoio que a cooperação vem recebendo por parte da Corretoria de Pesquisa, Criação e Inovação, o Desculpa. Especialmente por parte do professor Ronaldo Lopes, que é projetor de pesquisa, assim como da assessoria internacional da UFBA. Salvo também que, como a professora Luzimar já citou, desculpa que desconectou aqui por algo no computador, desculpa. Como a professora Luzimar já citou, a pró-reitoria de pesquisa, também através do edital Programa de né, através do primeiro pedido, que é o Programa de Pós-graduação em nome dia, financiou a minha estadia, a minha visita à Howard University no mês de abril de 2022, e também vem, né, fornecendo apoio via ao programa Sprint, agora através do edital número 004, é, 02 de 2022, do professor Visitante do Brasil, e financia a unidade do professor Yousef, aqui nesse momento, e finalmente ficamos muito felizes por sermos contemplados também pelo programa Pós-graduação de Bioquímica e Biologia Molecular, através de EDITAL 003, para bolsas de doutorado no exterior, como já foi citado. É importante ressaltar aqui o apoio do professor Paulo Ribeiro, também para essa operação, que é orientador de pesquisa vital. Agora venho aqui apresentar o nosso palestrante, o doutor Yousef Tizabi, que é bacharel em Física pela Universidade de Colômbia, da Califórnia, Universidade da Califórnia, e é doutor em Fisiologia pela Georgetown University. O professor Yousef, ele iniciou suas atividades na Harvard como professor assistente em 1976. E hoje ele é professor de farmacologia na Howard University, professor titular, como professor, atuando no Colégio de Medicina. Ele trabalhou em projetos de pesquisa financiados por agências norte-americanas, entre elas a NIH, e é revisor de mais de 48 revistas internacionais e revisor de agências de financiamento dos Estados Unidos, pela Departamento, Departamento, a National Science Foundation e dentre outras, National Cancer Institute. E, por fim, sendo que ele já publicou mais de 145 artigos científicos em revistas universitárias. Estou a invite Dr. Yousef, and say thank you very much for coming. It's an honor to be with you again. Thank you very much.
Bom dia, muito obrigado. Desafortunadamente, não falo português, pero minha esposa fala muito bem. So, it is really an honor and pleasure to be here. I was here in 2019 for a conference, beautiful conference, organized by my colleague, dear colleague Sylvia. Met Fernando and many of the people here, and it's really a pleasure to be back. I was telling colleagues that Salvador can be addictive. You cannot stay too long from here. So hopefully with what Victor was mentioning about our collaboration, there will be more opportunity for visiting and you also coming to Washington. So I'm going to talk about some of our work here. I would like to dedicate this talk to my two dear friends, Cedria and Victor, who visited me in Washington and was a great cooperation. And I'm looking forward to receiving Fernanda in our university. So I'm going to talk about this subject: can tremor, depression, and progression of Parkinson's disease be suppressed simultaneously? The very short answer is yes. So if you do not want to stay here for the next 2-3 hours and hear me, you can just think you have the answer. But please don't. I'm joking. It's not 2-3 hours. It's hopefully less than an hour. So we're going to talk about the subject, but I want to let you know where Howard University is. As you see, it was founded in 1867, over 150 years ago. And it is the first HBCU in the United States, meaning historically Black college or university. And the way it was founded was that when during the Civil War, the North won against the South, there were some Black soldiers that were fighting with the North against the South, and they were under the command of a general called General Howard. And after the victory, General Howard petitioned the Congress government, Lincoln's cabinet, to establish a center of higher education for the Blacks that were freed. They established a center for religious studies, and a year after that, 1868, they established College of Medicine. And because the principle of the university was to provide education for Black or people that could not have the education anywhere else. And until really 1960s, there were severe discrimination, but now it's a lot easier. So we are located very strategically in a very nice campus that we saw in Northwest Washington, D.C., and are only a few miles from the Congress and the White House. And it is this old hospital. This hospital, by the way, was called Freedmen's Hospital. It was named for freedmen, people that were freed from slavery, and was not a name of a person. And it's a nice campus we have. And as you see, majority of our students are African American, Black, and also coming from other countries, Africa, Trinidad, Jamaica, etc. In fact, our president is from Trinidad. And this is College of Dentistry, the same thing. And we have the law school, basically all disciplines we have, School of Business. And this is the view of from my, basically that office. It's a new library, I think, Victor told me. So this has been a very important, they call it Mecca for Black education. And it is the first HBCU, it is Howard. The first American white university was Harvard. So we are Harvard. Sometimes people say Harvard, but they think it's the same, but we have to tell them, no, this is Washington. Anyway, so the objective is to provide evidence of that inflammation may be considered as the common denominator in depression as well as Parkinson's disease. And also provide support for neuroplasticity. And I'll also add something about dysbiosis, the gut-brain axis later. So the outline is to talk about depression, neurochemical substrate, specifically emphasize neuroinflammation and neuroplasticity, dysbiosis, and you will see that more or less the same chemical substances are involved in Parkinson's disease. Neurochemical inflammation, neuroplasticity, like dysbiosis. So it's not unreasonable to expect that you would have the depression and Parkinson comorbid, like being together at the same time. And I'm going to talk about some new treatments that can affect both of these conditions. I'm going to emphasize nicotine. No smoking, nicotine. Okay. We'll talk about that. So, depression. We all know kind of what depression is. It's a mental illness, can affect a person's feeling of loss, despair, guilt, probably all these things, right? And it has specific criteria, anhedonia is ability to experience pleasure, irritability, all this. So we all at one point or another might have these symptoms, all these, but this cannot be called depression. It's like you have some despair or whatever, loss of something, someone, etc. But the problem is when this becomes continuous and affects your daily activity, then obviously you need to have treatment. And in terms of the statistics, it is one of the most common debilitating mental disorder. It is 121 million people worldwide. In the United States, very high percentage. Unfortunately, not everybody gets diagnosed and or treated for this condition. And this can be devastating because eventually, if you do not treat this feeling of despair that you have no reason to live, you have this suicide problem. And this is really a major problem. 1 billion people worldwide, United States, fair share, and it is basically in all cultures and ethnicity. And it's that feeling of despair. I have this from Times Magazine a few years back in my office to remind me of how important this problem is. This is about military veterans that has 1 a day of suicide rate, and actually it is this is in veterans, but active duty is a lot more. A few years back, it was 3 suicides in the course of 1 month on one of these cruise ships, the naval ships, and it was a major concern for Department of Defense. So this is called an invisible enemy, which is really more devastating than external enemy, because it's internal. So it's an issue, and the main factor in all this, I would mention in one word, is most likely stress. So we know we are all a product of our gene and environment, and the interaction between these two brings the circuitry in the brain that is so complicated that eventually affects the interaction between these two, affects this, and then the other thing, eventual feeling of that despair or anhedonia, lack of pleasure, can be the ultimately. So the idea is to find out what are sometimes the genetic factors or the environment. And once these neurochemical changes happen, if we know exactly what is going on, we can treat it. So in terms of the depression, in the past 60 years was a tremendous progress in treatment of such mental disorder by providing biogenic amines. So basically, I'll show you in the next slide that we have these treatments for depression, and they are based on the theory that biogenic amines, meaning norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, are low in the brain and are able to boost any of these neurotransmitters. Unfortunately, this has not been the ultimate cure. It has helped a lot. I'm not to mention the same thing in Parkinson, but we still are far from a complete cure or treatment. So in terms of increasing basically the level of biogenic amines, this can be in terms of all neurotransmitters. When we talk about dopamine, we know the synthetic pathway. When you get the release of dopamine, we act on the postsynaptic receptors. And we know that the biogenic amines are taken up by reuptake mechanism. So if you block this reuptake mechanism or can stimulate this receptor or increase this release, any which way you do, you have more dopamine and therefore release of these symptoms. And this is a very well established biochemical mechanism. So the antidepressants, first it was the norepinephrine dopamine uptake inhibitors. Now the serotonin uptake inhibitors are the most prominent use for antidepressants. However, all these antidepressants have this a delay in onset of action. It takes 2 weeks. They have side effects, and they are not effective for everyone. So we still need new treatments. And the culprits, what is the cause to find out, to be able to treat, is what we think are 2, maybe 3 major components. One is inflammation, that it has been well established that inflammatory mediators play a very important role in depression, and this is supported by seeing that the markers of inflammation, cytokines, TNF-alpha, is increased in depressed patients. You can have the antidepressant reduce the level of these cytokines, and actually, a couple of years back, I had a review in progress in metabolic rate that summarizes all these factors. This again is the same thing that, as I mentioned, anti-inflammatory can improve depression. Now, the same thing, in addition to inflammation, you know, we have the neurogenesis. It was found that neurogenesis, production of new neurons, stops, that we don't have any production. That's not true. We do have production of new neurons throughout life. Problem is that this production is not enough to overcome what we lose. So we have a net loss. But if we can stimulate this neurogenesis, we have a way of overcoming some of these problems. And one of the most important factors in neurogenesis is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and this has been established really well. You can inject that into the particular area of the brain, hippocampus, you get antidepressant effect. We have done quite a bit of this in lot of stuff. All antidepressants that we have used in our animal model, and we see that they all increase the level of BDNF, specifically in the hippocampus and frontal cortex. So these two conditions are basically supported. Again, the neurotrophic factors is the basically reiteration of what I was saying. And most antidepressants do have an effect on neurogenesis, like, for example, fluoxetine, that is used most commonly as a serotonin uptake inhibitor, acts via stimulating the 5-HT3 receptor. This was just published a few months ago. So, in summary then, for this part, inflammation and dysfunction in neuroplasticity reflected by a decrease in neurotrophic factors and increase in cytokines appear to be hallmarks of depression. So, Parkinson's disease, which is a movement disorder, basically, but it's really not a movement disorder only. It has a lot of other comorbidities. As you know, it's characterized by this type of posture, shuffling move, tremor, etc. Primarily a movement disorder that is due to loss of dopaminergic cells to substantial level. So we have three dopaminergic pathways, as you know. There is the major limbic that comes from the ventral tegmental area, goes to nucleus accumbens. That's the reward mechanism. So whenever we feel pleasure, it's due to release of dopamine in the striatum, specifically nucleus accumbens, that's major limbic. The nigrostriatal, starting in a substantial nigron and going to striatum, that's the dorsal, that is associated with movement disorder. And you also have the dopamine projection from the hypothalamus to pituitary that controls the endocrine. Specifically, dopamine is a prolactin inhibitor. So it has many different important physiological functions. So when you lose dopamine, it is possible that you will be affecting all these at the same time. Less dopamine, depression, less dopamine, Parkinson, specifically for this pathway. So that's why in terms of the method for the culprits, what causes or is involved in Parkinson, aging is the most important factor. If you can stop aging, can avoid, you are in luck. I can do it. Maybe in future generations faster. And genetics, we know that many of the genes, specifically alpha-synuclein, has been involved with the etiology of depression, environment. So farmers that are using insecticides, pesticides, like protein and paraquat, have more increased risk of developing Parkinson. There are the heavy metals. We have done some experiments with iron and manganese, specifically in our cell culture study. And this was an interesting case. In the early 1980s, there were some people experimenting with some derivative of this, basically an adhesive, and they synthesized MPTP. They self-administered MPTP, and there were a lot of them went to the hospital and they were thinking that they have Parkinson. But it turned out that it was because of the MPTP toxicity. And now this compound is used very commonly in inducing models of Parkinson. And we have not used that, but we have done rotinone and other compounds for this. So, in terms of the specific mechanisms, proteins, misfolding of proteins is a very important aspect. I mentioned about alpha-synuclein, mitochondrial damage, oxidative stress, neuroinflammation. These are all interrelated kind of apoptosis, excitotoxicity, autophagy, and finally dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means dysregulation of the gut-brain axis. This is becoming now a very prominent field in terms of the microbiome in the gut affecting the brain. And so we can do a lot of treatment by just giving probiotics, because we want to change the balance from the bad microbiome to the good ones. And this is very possible and really a very interesting field. So for people that are getting into this area would be very rewarding. So again, same thing I mentioned with the depression, Parkinson, exactly the same thing, except what we do is for Parkinson, we give the precursor of all this, which is L-DOPA, that gets converted to dopamine in the brain, and you get spectacular relief of symptoms. Unfortunately, this only lasts for a few years, 4 or 5 years, and you develop resistance to L-DOPA. And my colleague here will probably attest that much better than I do. And not only you get resistance, also develop side effect called dyskinesia that can sometimes be worse than the tremors of Parkinson's. So you reduce the dose, you give some more of these specific dopamine agonists, but still we are in need of better treatment. And so in terms of the progression of the disease, L-DOPA does affect the symptoms, but remember there is the degeneration of dopaminergic neurons in subsynaptic. We don't know why, how, but I mentioned some of the potential culprits. You can avoid the environment, but eventually a lot of the cases are idiopathic, means we don't know the cause. And so eventually what we want to do is have a treatment that would delay or stop the progression. Because what we are doing, we are treating the symptom, but once the neurons have deteriorated beyond a certain point, there is no help. This is the critical part. And for the culprits, again, you have the immune system, and I just, for the sake of time, I would say that the neuroinflammation induced by microglia can lead to neurodegeneration, and this is an important mechanism. And the involvement of microglia, microglia is very important for defense system in the brain, but overactivation, same in periphery, overactivation of the immune system leading to neuroinflammation can be detrimental. So the idea would be to basically suppress the neuroinflammation, not total function of the microglia. So that this is a culprit. I'll skip through this. And again, in terms of the other component, neurogenesis and neurotrophic factors, specifically BDNF, playing a role in etiology of Parkinson's. There is a lot of evidence for that. So basically what I want to say is that you have common denominators for both depression, dopamine, inflammation, lack of neurogenesis, and exact same thing in Parkinson. So if we can find something that affects this symptoms simultaneously, and we can overcome some of these. I'm going to skip through this slide, basically just to reiterate. Neuroinflammation, dysregulation of neuroplasticity can be hallmarks of post-depression and Parkinson. This can be added, this dysbiosis here. And the fact is that you have a significant comorbidity, means that people that get diagnosed with Parkinson, you would expect to feel anyone diagnosed with a progressive disease, even if it's not progressive, it's detrimental, you would feel down, depressed. But this is more than just that diagnosis. It's because of the biochemical basis is the same as I mentioned before. And there is also actually non-motor symptoms that happen in Parkinson are preceding the symptoms of motor. So depression or loss of smell, a lot of autonomic dysfunction can be preceding and can give you the idea that there might be some progression in this disease. I would skip again here, dysbiosis, I've emphasized that, put it just by itself, and there is a lot of evidence for involvement of dysbiosis in Parkinson's disease. This is well reviewed in many recent articles. This is basically a summary of blood-brain interaction with details that can be found anywhere. And again, this is a more emphasis of the dysbiosis that I was encouraging you to follow up. So, novel targets for depression and or PD or combination. So remember, we want to do three things. We want to inhibit inflammation. We want to increase neurogenesis, maybe affect the dysbiosis, which is a new one, and stop the degeneration, right? So, what is the drug that I want to emphasize here now? It is nicotine. So, nicotine is derived from this beautiful flower coming from tobacco. It's a rather simple structure, can be synthesized easily, and it is, as you know, a stimulant, highly addictive, one of the most addictive drugs, and it is basically anxiolytic. People smoke because they say it calms their anxiety down, anxiolytic versus anxiogenic. So this is a term we use in pharmacology, and we want to say a drug causes anxiety, it's called anxiogenic. When it reduces anxiety, it's called anxiolytic. So that's one thing. The other is it is a very potent antidepressant, and we think a lot of people that smoke are trying to self-medicate with nicotine. And in fact, if you look at the incidence of smoking, I don't know what's the percentage in Brazil, but in the US, about 25% of people smoke. And it seems like it came down from 50% or even higher. But it seems like there is a bottom line. We cannot reduce it any further. But let's say 20, 25% of people smoke in general. But if you take a population of depressed patients, you will see that the incidence of smoking is at least twice that much. And we believe that they are self-medicating with nicotine. Even more so is with people with psychosis. Schizophrenic patients are basically chain smokers. because they need that stimulation from nicotine. And for both depressed and psychotic patients, it's very difficult to quit smoking because they will go under withdrawal, right? In addition to that, we have cognitive enhancement. It has been shown that, okay, so I have to give you an anecdote. People in the, you know baseball game, right? So if you watch US baseball games, you would see that the ones that want to strike or the pitcher, they always have some tobacco in their mouth, and the obviously they keep spitting. And this thing is to keep them concentrated, increase their cognitive function. I don't like baseball, I'm sorry. But also analgesic. One of the most potent analgesic compounds ever found is derived from the skin of frogs, Ecuadorian frog, epibadin. Epibadin is 100 times more potent than morphine, except it has side effects. So, and we believe nicotine acting on its receptors has this analgesic effect. And so people might use for all these conditions, but the one I want to emphasize is its neuroprotective effect. And this is what I'm going to talk about. There are other therapeutic potentials. You know, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is treated by Ritalin. Ritalin is basically amphetamine stimulant. So they think nicotine might have same effect for Tourette syndrome, for obsessive compulsive disorder, and also for anti-inflammatory cases like ulcerative colitis. So nicotine can have a lot of beneficial effects, except when you take it through tobacco, you have 4,000 other elements that can cause cancer and cannot be compatible with them. And in fact, smoking cessation, stopping smoking is the most preventable cause of point of prevention of death. So this, I saw this just a few days ago, that there is a consideration of reducing the nicotine in tobacco. So the concern is that people depressed or psychotic that are going to be using, they might need more substitutes. So this is what I was mentioning, and it was just published last week, a few days ago in Drug and Alcohol Research. So there is some validity to what I'm saying. Okay, I'm just going to go through very quickly. So when I see somebody throw a stone, then I stop. The action of nicotine is mediated via nicotinic receptors. Nicotinic receptors are ligand-gated ion channels. So basically, you open the channel once nicotine binds, and you get the flow of ion, very quick action. This is in contrast to G protein coupled receptors, where you have the activation of the second messenger site and down the string. That is also fast in terms of the molecular mechanism, but this is a lot fast. So this mechanism is what gives nicotine its potency in terms of activating the mesolimbic system that I mentioned for reward. And you have nicotinic receptors in strategic positions in the PTA that would stimulate this pathway of the reward. That's why it's so highly addictive. And nicotine as antidepressant has been shown over and over. And I just give you the example of people self-medicating. A lot of preclinical as well as clinical studies that show nicotine as antidepressant effect. And it has neuroprotective effect via reducing inflammation, increasing plasticity, and it increases dopamine release. I mentioned in terms of the mesolimbic, but it does that everywhere. So it can be helpful for Parkinson as well. But in addition to releasing dopamine, what is most important about nicotine is that it will inhibit the degeneration, the progression of the disease. That's the hypothesis. And hopefully, with our colleague, we can start some clinical trial on this aspect. So nicotine is a potent neuroprotectant. It's just basically repeat of what I mentioned. And because Parkinson and depression are comorbid, you can have nicotine that can do both. So this was what I was first mentioning. The answer to the question is yes, and nicotine is the answer. Now, I won't go into this, but I want to emphasize something. I mentioned there is the association of depression and smoke, right? That more depressed patients smoke, more psychotic patients smoke because of the nicotine self-administration. And they are, of course, damaging the system, lung cancer. Right? Now, I want to say something important, but I want you to be very careful. Take a sip of water so you can concentrate. Now, of all the ill effects of smoking, what has been shown epidemiologically over and over is that the incidence of Parkinson's disease is lower in smokers. So, please be very careful. Don't smoke to prevent Parkinson because you might not get to that age to prevent it. Okay? So, it is nicotine. So, what we want to do is keep pure nicotine because it's just so evident that this is the cause and effect, and we believe that is the case. Then why not? So, nicotine might be addictive, right? With the patients that would take it. In Parkinson, so what? We say, because they would need it for the duration of their life. If it's addictive, it's like being addicted to a drug that or a compound that you need. So I give always the example of a diabetic. They are dependent on insulin. Are they addicted to it? They have to have it their entire life. So if they can get the benefits, so what? It's like it's a treatment. So that's why I'm hoping that we can start a clinical trial with nicotine in Parkinson's and look at not only their movement disorders, but also these other characteristics, specifically depression. It might even affect their cognitive function because we know with Parkinson, they also lose some of their cognitive ability and so on. So this would be really the bottom line. And I have other compounds I'm not going to go into, but hopefully we can start with some collaboration with plant derivative drugs, flavonoids. There are proof that some plant derivatives, flavonoids, like I just go very quickly, resveratrol, and all these nice activities. And the same with curcumin, hopefully some other plant derivatives. The problem with both these two, which is really well established, is that the bioavailability is very low. So we need some selective drugs that will act on receptors to avoid this bioavailability. And if we can get some compounds that can do this, let me skip all this. Just in terms of depression, I'm just going to do the microbiome, the relationship between dysbiosis is a very fertile area. More and more research is being done, and it's really a great, and we have some evidence in our own lab that some of these drugs that affect this biosis can be really helpful in Parkinson's disease. We have these two papers that attest to that, basically. So, in summary, plant-based chemicals, probiotics, specifically molecules affecting glutaminergic or cholinergic, specifically nicotinic receptors in cholinergic system, are fertile venues for development of novel antidepressant and neuroprotectants. And I just want to acknowledge my colleagues, and we have collaboration with many different countries, and I hope that the next presentation will have Brazil here. So, and with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yousef, for your excellent talk. It was a very good class. Agora a gente vai abrir para as perguntas, we open for questions. Se quiser fazer perguntas em inglês, ou em português também pode, a gente traduz. Flávia.
Okay, exactly. There is, I didn't quite go into this. There is the disparity between women and the men. A lot more depression is evident in women. And this is interesting, I didn't mention, in terms of suicide rate, there is about 21 in 100,000 for men and 6 per 100,000 for women. So the suicide rate is less in women. However, women are roughly 6 times more likely to attempt suicide. And the reason is because the incidence of depression is definitely higher in women than men. And there is an interesting relation with the smoking also, or drinking. So we do the studies with alcohol, nicotine, and self-medication, basically. With alcoholism, which is also a very big problem, it seems like women start alcohol due to mood disorder. And so they treat the depression kind of with alcohol. And in men, seems like they drink for the high, but when you become dependent on alcohol because of the neurochemical changes, it makes it worse. So there is absolute disparity, and in fact, NIH now wants any study that is conducted to include the gender difference because of the, as you mentioned, differences in number of patients, difference in neurochemical basis, difference in response to medication. So yes, that is, and you know, I absolutely believe that the wiring system is also different between men and women, right? We can think a little different, but there is all that. Yes.
Some information from the study and range of from internet and impression, evolução ou fato.
So the question is whether there is any evidence of increasing BDNF as a mechanism for depression and or Parkinson. Yes. The drugs that we use already have this effect in both. In fact, I wrote a review article that was published arguing that because of the similarity in what I mentioned in terms of the progression, not necessarily progression, but the biochemical basis, is that if you discover any antidepressant, you should expect it to have some neuroprotectant effect as well, and vice versa. So it is very likely that a compound would have both effects. That if you have this, it has the other one. The question is the potency. So the antidepressants that are currently used, they all have been shown to have some neuroprotectant effect, but to a lesser extent. And all these have been shown to be associated with some increase in BDNF. So the answer to the question whether BDNF is involved is yes. Actually, I mentioned if you inject BDNF directly into the hippocampus, you alleviate at least in rats, of course. So the question is whether we can today, again, to backtrack a little, the level of neurogenesis, no matter how much you stimulate, is not quite adequate to overcome the degeneration. But in terms of the depression, it might be a lot more effective because, again, to distinguish between depression and Parkinson, as you know, Parkinson is progressive, right? And you are losing the neurons and you cannot have enough of the neurotransmitter, right? In depression, you have less of the neurotransmitter. It's not necessarily due to the degeneration, but the circuitry. So that's why it is readily reversible. You can reverse depression, but you cannot reverse Parkinson, right? So the idea would be to inhibit or stop or delay the progression. And BDNF is definitely a factor. So there are, you know, it's always more than one thing. It's like inflammation, oxidative stress, neuroplasticity, but inflammation and oxidative stress are go hand in hand basically. So if you, and there is of course the question of autophagy, they are all kind of interrelated, but if you can affect the system in various stages, that's really the idea. the idea of multi-drug therapy is something that is now becoming more popular. It used to be thought that if you combine more drugs together, you get more side effects. But we know in cancer treatment, it's always multiple because you want to hit it in different cities. And there is no reason why we cannot do it in neurodegenerative or neuropsychiatric. So, yeah. Long answer to, but yes, please.
And I'd like to know about the private drugstores. How when there when the product that yeah.
Biodisponibilidade da nicotina.
Que a gente vai encontrar numa drogaria.
So, so the question is, I guess, whether nicotine has been tried in Parkinson and the bioavailability, pharmacokinetics, and how it can be affected. Yes. Okay. There has been 8 to 10 clinical trials with nicotine with Parkinson. But I could have told them, don't try these trials because they're not going to work. The reason they tried, or the way they tried nicotine was, there is nicotine patch available, right? They use nicotine patch. Nicotine patch is good for smoking cessation, right? And if you know the pharmacokinetics, nicotine patch is like a steady state release of nicotine. When you have a steady state, you desensitize the nicotine. When people smoke, they take a puff, then another puff, and then they have a break between the cigarette and the next one. Right? So it gives the chance for the receptors to become sensitized again so it can be hit again. So the critical way of doing it would be to give nicotine in a pulsatile, what we call pulsatile form, like the smoking. Except you don't want to give it by cigarette or tobacco. There is pure nicotine spray, nasal spray, or inhalation. And Pfizer in the United States produced this compound for smoking cessation because a person that's smoking cigarettes, they can have pure nicotine and then wean them from that, right? This is available, but only in US. So we are hoping, and there are nicotine inhalers available in the market that we can use to try this in patients. So the idea would be to do this pulsatile form of intervention, and the pharmacokinetics for the inhalers and nasal spray have been very well established. Nicotine has minimal side effect, and you can get adapted. So with the protocol that we're proposing would be to have low increase in nicotine dose And these are probably people that are not smokers, but with a heart protection. So you give them level of the time increase, and then you hope that the symptoms are gone. So this is really what we're going to do. Thank you for the question.
Doutor Maria, por favor.
As you know, translating neuroprotection from that are one of the people say is that or the PC cabinet before they develop and it's doing that after really develop. And it's really hard for us to identify patients before they develop data. Once you have the Parkinson's sign, the patients will already have Parkinson's for 10 years. They will have or other subtle clinical signs and not been able to identify these prodromal signs. My question is do you have experimental data on your that slows progress? Parkinson is developed experimental.
Excellent question. So we have a clinician that actually deals with Parkinson patients. And the comment first was that when you see a Parkinson patient, they have already had the degeneration. It has progressed to the point where they have lost maybe 80% of their dopaminergic cells in subcutaneous, and they are showing the symptoms, and of course it progresses. So the question is whether there has been any studies showing that treatment with nicotine in animal models that can prevent this initiation progression. So the answer, in short, I will believe is yes. So what has been happening? You develop a Parkinson model in animals, and actually it has been done in monkeys that have been treated with MPTP specifically, and they develop symptoms of Parkinson, right? The monkeys that were treated with nicotine did not develop that. So there is, I think, sufficient evidence that you can have this neuroprotection. However, as you mentioned, it might be at the stage that they come to clinic, they already have had substantial degeneration, but still, if we can delay or perhaps stop the progression, so they won't get worse. But you're absolutely right. If we can identify some normal, maybe sense of smell, depression, or however, or something genetic testing, right? Then you have some candidate patients. But even if you don't, when you get them, it's to delay. I don't think we can reverse it, except maybe with the transplant of the new cells, if that works. But hopefully, with progress in markers and identifying the patients, then can be intervened early. So I must mention, this is a strong hypothesis, right? And you never know until you do the clinical trial. We think there is enough basis to do it. And sometimes you go trial, phase 1 goes well, phase 2 goes well, phase 3 maybe even, and then phase 4, no, to the available. But it's a worthwhile to believe that that's the final point.
Thank you so much for your talk. And just in curiosity, I was wondering if you have tried focusing on oligodendrocytes, because especially the question, you know, there is a relation and the function and oligodendrocytes and degradation. So I was wondering if you have some data on nicotine in oligodendrocyte development.
So the question is because of the association of glial cells and oligodendrocytes specifically, whether they have done any specific studies with nicotine effect on oligodendrocytes. This is what we're planning to do with Sylvia. And there are some studies showing that it does affect the microglia in terms of inflammation. So again, so much supportive data that we want to try it with John Marie, I hope.
Mais uma pergunta.
Congrats for the presentation. And I was wondering what the characteristics to something like virus or spray, like you say, treat that patients right now.
So I
What else the characteristics to do that, right?
So the question is whether if it's nasal spray or inhalers from Pfizer, right? If they are not available in Brazil, let's say, can a pharmacist make a nicotine inhaler to give to patients? So first of all, it has to be, I believe, pharmacists cannot just give it to someone. It has to be tried. I guess the physician has to write the prescription for a specific drug. If it can be synthesized or developed, I believe, I'm not sure with the drug synthesis pharmacist, because you can run into a lot of trouble because you don't know the purity, how it's going to be handled, like the device that you're going to use for spray or inhalation. So all those things have to be done with the drug to be able to give it to the patient. But there are already inhalers available. So you don't need to make it. It's already available. So you can actually, Pfizer has made restrictions for use of the nasal spray and inhalers, just in US. So, but there are nicotine inhalers that are available on the market, and people all over the world can use them. So we just have to provide enough evidence that yes, this is. In fact, what we did to promote this, I could not find any movement disorder center that would try the Pfizer drug, right? So what we did, we got a patent. We got a patent for use of pulsatile nicotine for Parkinson. So this means it has been approved, even at the patent, that it might be, that it's a worthwhile trial. So that's all. And it's available. So,
For questions, mais perguntas?
Julia, the last one.
About the inflammation, what do you know about the whole of us are still uncertain. Has some data is more significant about
The question is whether have any data on anti-inflammatory effects of nicotine, specifically in relation to astrocytes and microglia. We haven't done it ourselves, but like I mentioned, we have to do it ourselves in more detail, but there are some studies showing that it has definitely anti-inflammatory effects. Some of the effects are through mitochondrial oxidative stress that is prevented. And I believe there are some specific studies which might be, but not that many. So that's where we can actually contribute in that. Right.
Mais perguntas? Vou abrir só para mais uma e eu vou fechar com a minha.
So if I get the question, thank you for the compliment. I believe you're asking whether there has been or consideration for nicotine specifically in cognitive function dementia, right? As we speak, there is a clinical trial for use of nicotine in mild cognitive dysfunction, right? Mild cognitive impairment, mild cognitive, which would really translate eventually to Alzheimer's disease, right? And this is also very interesting. The person that initiated this study, they had some clinical trials showing that nicotine patch actually has been helpful. So I told the principal investigator that patch might be go falsified. It did. He said, I agree, but we got the grant to do it with patch. We have to stick with patch. So there is a clinical trial on mild cognitive impairment with nicotine patch. In terms of the Parkinson, this is what we are proposing to do, actually. So hopefully we'll have some answers to your question in the next talk. Exactly. So I think the idea would be when you look at the patient, right, you would look at the spectrum of the comorbid condition. These patients have sleep problem. They have maybe some sensory issues, cognitive, mood, etc. So you have to have a spectrum of analysis associated with the movement, like the freezing gait, that is a very common thing. And yes, to see what dosing regimen might be helpful. And that's the idea, to try increasing the dose until you get the benefit, hopefully.
In other pharmacological applications, recently you published a paper, a review about the range protective effects of nicotine in SARS-CoV infection. Can you talk something about it?
Okay, so this is a whole new bag of so I mentioned in the beginning, maybe 2-3 hours, so maybe that would be the case. So I will make it short. First is regard of nicotine and COVID-19, right? So when it first started, there were a couple of things. There was the anti-parasite drug, ivermectin, that was shown promised an antiviral. And this really, I was talking to some clinicians and people, there is this paper, and you give ivermectin to it because it's already an approved drug. It's approved for antiparasitic or something that a clinician in the US can prescribe any drug for anything. They call it off-label. So they said there are two problems. One, that it's not FDA approved. If it works, it's okay, but if it doesn't, you have liability. And the US liability, suing and laws and all that, people avoid that. Then came the question of, there were some reports from China, actually, when it started, that the, again, incidence of COVID infection is less in smokers. But, again, the caution, don't smoke alcohol. But if the smoker got COVID and got to the hospital, his prognosis was a lot worse because of the effect on the lung that had. So I started looking at the potential nicotine in SARS COVID, and we wrote a paper that was published in the Federation of European Biological Sciences. Got a lot of, it's a controversial. We said that it could be because of all these potential effects, anti-inflammatory, and also, very interestingly, it might have also anticoagulant effect. And coagulation is a big problem in COVID. So eventually, I'm still getting some people that say, well, it's a good, and some say, they think I'm saying smoking. They say, no, don't say, no. In fact, they say, every time I say nicotine, people think smoking. Even in the medical field, I have to emphasize. So that was one paper with the COVID. And actually, we did a paper with Juan Segura on ivermectin that we published in COVID, becoming expert on COVID. We did some studies, publications with vitamin D and K and coagulation of COVID. So, but in terms of the SARS-CoV-2 association with Parkinson and Alzheimer's, it was colleagues in Mexico that initiated that, Daniel Limon and his group, and I, because of the experience with nicotine, so there is the association. Basically, what it says eventually is that SARS-2 doesn't lead to any of these conditions, but if you have any of these neurodegenerative diseases and you get COVID, your prognosis is worse. So that's the bottom.
Great lecture and great discussion.
Thank you very much. Nice questions and discussions. Thanks again. It's a pleasure being here, and I hope to continue with this collaboration. Thank you.
Agora, finalizando, gostaria de agradecer pela presença de todos. Está no verão em Salvador, período de férias, esse auditório está cheio e ainda temos espectadores online. Um agradecimento especial para a professora Deise Vilas Boas, que já é colaboradora com a Howard junto conosco e tem um apoio muito importante para a realização desse evento. Um agradecimento também à professora Márcia Silva, que nos cedeu o canal do YouTube, Descomplicando na Biofísica, para que a gente pudesse transmitir, e nossa equipe de apoio, Milan, sempre, que nos passam a segurança imensa de que tudo vai dar certo, né? E mais que também a aluno nosso permanecer. Então, agradeço a todos pela presença de vocês, e agora eu convido a professora Silvia Costa para falar um pouco mais sobre o histórico, né, da cooperação.
Obrigada, Vitor. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to receive you again in our group, in our institution. And é um grande prazer recebê-lo in the history that I want to return is that our collaboration begins with the Neurotoxicity Society. Now I'm in council, and it's a society, international society, that the goal is to share neuroscience, knowledge, neuroscience, especially for the Latin American people, young students. And we are very happy that probably we met each other in 2013, and we accepted the invitation to participate of our meeting in Europe. That you know, some of you know, that we do 2 years about this. And we are very happy that probably you do the next NTS meeting here in Salvador next year. And probably, of course, you will be here again to share your expertise. And we are very happy to receive you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the postgraduate program of molecular biology. The Camp Springs program is that's very important to our community. Thank you very much.
Para finalizar, agradecemos a presença de todos vocês. Realmente, esse evento não aconteceria. Eu solicito uma salva de palmas para vocês. Muito obrigada. Espero que a minha palestra, esse é um programa da nossa universidade, vai ser muito importante para a internacionalização dos nossos programas, e eu fico muito feliz quando eu vejo em plenas férias, a maioria de nós realmente em férias efetivas, tendo um laboratório cheio e com muitas pessoas, muitos estudantes, principalmente os estudantes, presentes para ouvir essa excelente palestra. Parabéns a vocês mais uma vez, e muito obrigada, professora Deise, por todo o apoio que vem dando, não só ao programa ao qual você está vinculada, que é o BPG, mas também ao nosso programa PMBQBI. E aos alunos que se fazem presentes, auxiliando os professores para que nossos eventos sejam cada vez mais divulgados, não só na universidade, mas também para o público externo, através dessa divulgação do YouTube. Professora Márcia recém-ingressa no nosso programa, que também está nos auxiliando. Tenham um bom dia a todos vocês e boas férias e até o próximo encontro.